call. I'm fund manager at Green Investment Partners, and I graduated from Bristol in 2013. I'd like to welcome you all to the fourth Bristol Connects live event. This online series will provide you with career insights from fellow graduates and give you the opportunities to ask questions which could help further your career or help you change your career. So today's event is going to focus on careers within green investments and hedge funds. And myself, Philip Skinner, Catherine Barker and Max Basta are here to provide you with career insight and to answer your questions. So I'd like to start with just some housekeeping. You can use the Q&A tab throughout the talk to ask questions, which we'll get to at the end of the presentation. We'll cover as many questions as we can during the allotted time, but if we run out of time, then please do email us at alumni-events@bristol.ac.uk, and we'll endeavour to answer any remaining questions via email. Please only use the Q&A tab to ask questions. Any comments or technical issues should be emailed to us, and the chat function is disabled on this event. So the views and opinions we're sharing today are our own personal views and opinions. We're representing ourselves, not our organisations. We also have Gareth Hughes, University of Bristol Graduate Careers Consultant, and Carl Anton and Kathleen Kuniga, Employability Advisors. They'll be able to answer careers-related questions during the session. So please submit your questions to them again on the Q&A tab. This session has been recorded and you'll receive an email link to the recording after the presentation. If you have any technical issues during the presentation, please do try and exit the Zoom meeting and re-entering. If you continue to have problems, please email the same email again, alumni-events@bristol.ac. So I'll spend 5 minutes, each of us will spend 5 minutes introducing ourselves. So I'll kick things off with, as I said, I'm a fund manager of Green Investment Partners. It's an investment company that I set up with my business partner. I'll go into a bit more detail about this later on. In terms of sort of my journey and how I got here from when I graduated from Bristol, I'm hoping this will help inform your career decision making and give you some insight to what sort of paths you can take. So I would also say, even in the world being in turmoil as it is, don't panic, especially if you're passionate about renewables and sustainability. It's a growing area and it will have to grow a lot more in the decades to come to achieve targets being set. So whether you have a clear plan or no plan, try to enjoy the journey and keep focused on what you enjoy and wish to achieve. I'm also happy to connect on LinkedIn if there's anything further I can help with after this presentation. So in terms of career, I would say that my career has in some ways come full circle. Before and during my time at Bristol, I was working at a global consultancy called AECOM. I was joined them as part of their summer internship and sponsorship program. And I was focused on thermal modelling of buildings and improving sustainability. So incorporating renewable elements into building designs, such as heat pumps, solar, wind, etc. And over this sort of 3 years, it was a great introduction to the world of sustainability. Unfortunately, back in this was about 2010, 2009, green solutions were still viewed as like an optional extra. And during a slump in the market, the team was cut. And it was at this point that I got interested in finance and investing, thanks to the talks and societies that Bristol University put on. So I managed to get an internship at UBS Investment Bank. And safe to say, after a lot of hours and stress, I was left pretty disheartened and found it largely unenjoyable experience. And I was left thinking, is this all there is to finance? Good pay, but absolutely horrible hours and no real good social cause. Luckily, I stuck with it. And after a short stint setting up a software company, I joined a small niche lender called Castle Trust as a quant analyst. And this is where I got my real training in the finance space and completed my CFA. And I would say, this makes a big difference if you're coming from a non-finance background like myself. My role at Castle Trust became more and more about corporate development, investments and acquisitions. And as the business grew, I knew pretty quickly I wanted to go into investing full time. So I managed to get a role at Guinness Asset Management, working on their global innovators equity strategy. And this helped build my knowledge of investing in listed companies, looking for good companies that grow. Things we looked for were, good quality, decent balance sheets and good cash flows. Guinness also had a sustainable energy fund, and that definitely piqued my interest. And I realized, there was a way to combine my interest in sustainability, engineering, and investing. I even continued to work freelance for them when I took a year out to travel. And then next in my career, through an old colleague, I was put in touch with my now business partner, Fabian. His background is renewable energy investment banking, which very much complements my own equity analysis career. And since I met him and our mutual interest in investing and how companies work, we set out and created and secured funding for our current venture, which is Green Investment Partners. And we focus on green investments in the listed space and are launching an equity fund early next year. So our focus is on wind, solar, storage, batteries, waste, mobility, sectors like that. And I would say, it's definitely not the easiest time to start a business. COVID definitely doesn't help. But anyone out there with a passion for green investment should know that there isn't a single correct route to take. And hopefully you can see that from the route I've taken. I would also just mention, in terms of the current role that I'm in, the sorts of things that I do is, looking at green sector research, screening for companies, building out the portfolio tools, obviously trading and portfolio management, as well as investor meetings and raising investment for the fund, as well as running the company and getting that off the ground. So I think I've probably taken up enough time. So as a final message, I think I'd say, my big breaks have really come from networks of people I've met and by staying in touch with people I've encountered along the way. So you should also aim to build sort of incrementally on your knowledge and stay focused on what you're truly passionate about. So next, I would like to introduce Matt Basta. He's an impact analyst at Dolmer Impact Fund. So over to you, Matt.
Thanks very much, Josh, and hi everyone. As Josh said, my name's Max, and I'm an analyst at Dolmer Impact Fund. Currently part-time, we'll come on to that a little bit later. I graduated from Bristol with a degree in economics in 2016. I spent about 2 years in the impact investment space. I focused more on the sort of unlisted side, so like venture style, private equity style investment, where it's very hands-on. The firm takes a real role in helping the companies grow, and the idea is to kind of take companies that are at a much earlier stage and help them build sort of from not the ground up, but to build and become really successful. I've worked in Kenya and in Nepal, and I'm really passionate about the idea that the great ideas that are going to make the world a better place don't necessarily come from one country or another. Talent is sort of normally distributed. Education is not, but great ideas can come from anywhere. And there's a big problem in that capital is concentrated in the financial hubs such as London, and less evenly distributed throughout the world. So with my future career, which I hope is very long, longer than it has been so far, I'd like to play a role in helping direct capital flows to such ventures and ideas and companies. So I graduated in 2016, and I had quite a non-traditional route. I did study economics, but the first thing that I did after graduating is kind of followed a cause that I was very interested in at the time. I was reading a lot about the refugee crisis, and I decided to go straight to Calais after graduating and volunteered in the refugee camp there. I planned to stay for 2 weeks. I ended up staying for 6 months, and stayed there until the camp was demolished and everyone was sort of forcibly evicted. It really informed and changed, I think, my perspective on how to improve the situations of people across the world. After Calais, I moved back to London. I lived with my parents and worked in London for a year before discovering that impact investment even existed. Once I did discover it, I started talking to people within the space, and one of the common pieces of advice, the most common pieces of advice from them, was start building a network. And so I did. And so I spent nearly a year, in addition to kind of normal work, going for coffees, meeting people, and starting to build a network in the space. It took nearly a full year of that to turn into what ended up being my internship in Nairobi. In January 2019, I flew out to Nairobi to do an internship at an energy-focused venture firm called Energy Access Ventures. How did I meet people within the space initially? So I had this was through sort of like family and friends contacts. I met a couple of people that were loosely affiliated with the space. And, you know, they advised me to meet as many people as I could. So I continued to do that. I wish I'd sort of discovered it a couple of years before while I was at university, but I kind of discovered it then. In Kenya, I learned a lot about, you know, venture style investing in renewable energy in Africa. And after 6 months there, I got a job as an analyst at a company called Dolma Impact Fund in Nepal, where I currently work. I've been there for the past year and a half. My role has been very varied there. I've worked across a number of projects, including an initial focus on renewable energy, but I've also picked up a lot of sort of the pieces that, you know, people don't necessarily want to do. So I've been working a lot on the reporting side, on annual reports, and quarterly reports and stuff like that, and constantly learning about the investment process and everything that goes into that, building up my own kind of knowledge base. And then obviously this year the pandemic has hit, and as I said, I was working with a company in Nepal, and now I can't travel. So that caused a real kind of schism, made me sort of reevaluate what I was doing and what I could do. And so I decided to go back to university to do a master's this year. I'd been thinking about it for a while, decided that now was the right time. So I've gone part-time with my company, and I'm now in a full-time master's degree program, and my aim is to come out the other side of it with now a couple of years of strong industry experience and an extra layer of education, and kind of shoot on from there. So I'm hoping, I'm sorry if I've gone over my allotted time, I didn't intend to, but I'm hoping that what I can try and give today is sort of a flavor of how to kind of start the process of getting into the industry and kind of making connections and building a network and trying to get involved, perhaps if you haven't kind of been preparing for it for a very long time. Anyway, I'll pass it over to the next speaker. I'm not 100% sure who it's going to be. Maybe I'll pass it back to Josh. Maybe he has the list.
The next speaker, I believe, Catherine, do you want to?
Yes, I think it's me.
Thanks.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Catherine. I graduated from Bristol in 2011, which feels like a very long time ago now. And my degree was in accounting and management. So in terms of, I'm now head of finance at Bethnal Green Ventures, but I'll come on to that at the end. So in terms of my career path, I was busy in my second year of uni applying for lots of internships, and the one that came off was an audit internship at Ernst & Young. So that's kind of where I started, and I then went onto the graduate scheme kind of when I graduated in 2011. And so trained as an accountant there, so did my ACA qualification and worked with lots of different businesses, auditing them. And I guess, although audit might not be the kind of the most exciting thing to do, I really enjoyed working with lots of different businesses. I really enjoyed the variety of that. So that, and I guess during my time there, I kind of also made a lot of friends, and a few of them kind of actually went on after they'd done their ACA to start their own businesses. And through chatting to them, I got interested in startups, and I thought that kind of that would be something that I'd be interested to look at next. And through doing kind of research, I came across which was at the time a little known company called Deliveroo, and they were just starting to expand internationally, and were looking to set up a finance team. And so applied for that role and joined an FD there, and started to build out the finance team. So that was a great experience, which I really enjoyed, working for such a high growth business, and also being kind of interested in technology and food, of course. So it was really enjoyed that experience, and I was there for 3.5 years. I started in a role as a senior accountant, so that was more operational finance, but then moved into a more commercial role, working with partnering with all the general managers in the Northern Europe countries to kind of help from a commercial perspective, commercial finance in particular, help support and advise them on kind of questions they had, and helping to kind of grow their businesses. So after being there for 3.5 years, I guess by the time I left, it was a much bigger business than when I joined, and I got to the stage where I was looking to go back to work with kind of much smaller startups, and also I guess kind of from more of a personal perspective, I'd become interested in I was getting interested in like sustainability, and that's how I started researching different companies, and I came across a sustainable fashion company that I quite liked the look of, and they found out that one of their investors was Bethnal Green Ventures, and so started researching that company and got really interested in them. And so I guess how I found that job, my current job at Bethnal Green Ventures was actually researching them and then following them on LinkedIn, which is often actually a quite good way I find to find jobs, because some companies don't post it's find the jobs is by following companies you're interested in on LinkedIn. So yeah, on to Bethnal Green Ventures. We are an early stage venture fund. We invest kind of before pre-seed at accelerator stage, and we run an accelerator program twice a year, and the teams that we take on have to be a technology business and creating a positive impact on the world are the two criteria that we look for. So yeah, we run that program twice a year, and we invest in 10 teams on each of them. So it's been a great way to kind of get exposed to and learn and support lots of impact technology-driven businesses. So yeah, please feel free to ask any other questions about those businesses as we go through. But I think that's kind of everything from me for now. So I was going to pass you over to Phil, who is the Managing Director of GuarantCo.
Thank you, Catherine. Hopefully you can hear me all right. So yeah, just to complete on the introductions, Catherine said my current role is Managing Director with GuarantCo, which is the guarantee arm of the Private Infrastructure Development Group, which is a DFI development finance institution backed by a number of governments, including UK, Switzerland, Sweden, Netherlands, and Australia. But my journey since Bristol, and how did I get here? So I graduated in 2008. My degree was economics and politics. I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do. I had some social impact aspirations, but I hadn't really worked out where to go with that. I was also hit by a bit of a troubled job market, being 2008. And I was also a bit wary of getting into finance, despite my economics background, because there's quite a lot of banker bashing going on at that time, and wasn't such an attractive industry to go into. So anyway, as a result of my indecision, I found myself without a job. But I did find myself with a master's offer for Oxford. So I had an interest in particular in development economics. So I went on and did a master's at Oxford in development economics. Coming out of Oxford a year later, I was still a bit wary of the bankers. So I steered clear of that for another 2 years and worked for a political risk consultancy that was advising corporates on their exposure to political and violent risks in frontier markets. Did that for a couple of years, but what I realized is that, you know, despite my postgraduate education and all the rest of it, I really still wasn't a detailed subject expert on country risk, and I was more of a generalist, and as a result I got put in a sort of more sales, client management type role, which was great, learned a lot from it, but you know, I didn't find it as intellectually challenging as I was hoping for, and I wanted to do something that was a bit more challenging in that regard, and also put some of my you know, harder skills to practice. And so I found myself going back to what I did have a tangible skill in, which was numbers from my economics background. By this time I'd learned about development finance, and so I spoke with some contacts in my network, and their advice to me was, look, if you want to get into development finance, and I think this applies to any sub-branch of finance, that, you know, it doesn't hurt to get a grounding like Josh did with UBS or Catherine did with their ACA, just to get a grounding with a well-reputed firm, or in my case it was the Norwegian bank DNB Nor. So I did a couple of years there, effectively as a graduate, working in their energy team. And this is where I first started getting into renewables. And we were doing, as the Norwegians do, mainly oil and gas. But I kept quiet about that at dinner parties and talked mainly about the wind farms that we were doing in the North Sea. And that's where my passion was. And then came the coalition government in 2012, and Nick Clegg and David Cameron stood in the Rose Garden and announced the Green Investment Bank, which was funded with £3.7 billion of UK taxpayers' money to really get the offshore wind market going in the UK, as the project finance banks had withdrawn since the 2008 financial crisis. And I was really attracted to the impact-focused mandate of the Green Investment Bank to create an industry, create a market. So I joined them. That was a great 4 years I spent in total. And about 18 months before I left, we were approached by the government again to pilot a project. It was an equity fund to do renewables in East Africa, South Africa, and India. And this, for me, was just the alignment of everything that I was interested, right? You know, I could bring in my development finance background and the green stuff, which I developed a passion for in the interim. And yeah, so I worked on that for 18 months. Then the Green Investment Bank got sold to Macquarie. I decided that I wasn't probably the best cultural fit for Macquarie, and it was probably a time to move on to new pastures. So that's when the opportunity came to join GuarantCo, which is a pure development finance infrastructure play. But what's been really interesting in the 4 years that I've been there is that whilst over that sort of period, green was seen as a sort of sidecar to our investment mandate. You know, we did our normal transactions and then we did a couple of green transactions, and that was great. But now what we're seeing is that green has just come into the center, and absolutely everything that we do, whether it's a renewable energy project, student accommodation building, a road, everything needs a green filter applied to it. And so the question that we're asking ourselves today is, how do we promote greener forms of infrastructure in developing countries in a way that supports the economic development of these nations in a fair and just way, right? It's one of the core tenets of the Paris Agreement that this transition has to be just, and we have to keep an eye on the our core mandate of poverty alleviation, but still do that in a way as green as possible. So yeah, that's my journey from Bristol. I'll probably leave it there and pass back to Josh.
Great, thanks for that, Philip. So now if people could submit questions to the Q&A function, we can begin the Q&A part of this thing. First, though, I will start with some pre-submitted questions. So I suppose, who wants to go first, but I'll throw this one to Catherine if you're okay to answer this one. What is your favorite element of your current role?
My favorite element is, I think, getting to see the businesses that we work from such an early stage. And then I guess what I kind of didn't add is we then have although we invest through an accelerator program, these teams then become part of our portfolio, and we support them kind of through their journey. So Bethnal Green Ventures has been going for 8 years, so we have such a range of different businesses in the portfolio. And my favorite part of my role is definitely seeing the progress and the positive impact that businesses are having.
Brilliant. And Max, there's a couple of questions coming in from the live Q&A, so I'm going to go a bit off script. What was your master's in? And maybe you can talk a bit about how that helped you get into impact investing from there. I just saw 2 questions. I thought I'd go.
Sure. I actually just typed an answer to one of them about the master's. So it's International Finance and Development at SOAS is what the master is in. And then what was the follow-up to that? Was
just whether you think it's necessary to sort of have further qualifications to get into impact investing.
Sure. Is it necessary? I mean, you kind of have to look up at where you want to be and then see what other people have. So, like, for example, Josh, you've done the CFA. A lot of people have done the CFA. If you want to do the CFA, or if you want to be really successful as an impact investor, want to lead a fund or similar, doing the CFA is a really good shout. But then you also have lots of fund managers that don't have the CFA. One thing that they definitely do have in common is they have a high level of education, whether that's a master's and or an MBA and or a CFA. That is important at some stage. But at an early stage, I think it definitely needs to be blended with some experience, because my view personally is that it's quite tough to get to impress upon people that you're really interested in the industry and you can really help them with just academic qualifications alone.
Yeah. Max, maybe I just, sorry, Josh, I'll just come in on that as well. I think what's interesting for me, because I recruit people across the globe. I mean, we have about 30 different nationalities, crazily, in a team of 55 people, and so I see a lot of differences between different markets, and in some countries it's very much the case that you need to have an MBA, right? Or their cultural expectation is that you have an MBA. US is one where finance MBAs come correlated. But I wouldn't say that's the case in all. Similar for masters. Personally recruiting into the DFI world, it's much more about relevant experience and understanding and passion. I mean, if you want an impact-driven role and you can demonstrate you have a passion for it, at the end of the day, we're not going to be able to pay you as well as Goldman Sachs, right? So you need an additional motivator. So I certainly wouldn't be sitting here encouraging people to go and take out additional student loans for tens of thousands of pounds to get this as prerequisite for entry into my industry anyway. I think the CFA is also a very interesting point. I think you need to think very carefully about what type of finance and green finance you're going to do. And I imagine, I don't really know Josh's world of buying and selling less listed equities. It's not something I've ever really done, but I imagine the CFA for Josh would be much more appealing than it is for an infrastructure investor looking at project finance. It's certainly not a prerequisite for joining my team. And I have a lot of guys who join them and they're halfway through a CFA and say, oh, can we have study leave for it? And I say, well, I don't need you to have a CFA to do your job, so why am I going to give you 2 days extra holiday, right? I mean, obviously I'm a bit more compassionate than that, but you have to be aware that a CFA doesn't necessarily, it's not a prerequisite for all finance professions.
Very good. And I would just say there's a couple of questions that have been pre-submitted, so I think we can tie this in to this sort of train of thought. One question was, what is the best way to transition into this arena after already completing a grad scheme in a different sector? And can you change your career path to green investments if you have no prior experience but have general professional experience? I think to this, I would say yes. As Philip said, if you have a genuine interest, that's something you can't, fake or learn. And if you have prior experience that can be adapted to green investments, there are generally lots of routes. So, as I previously said, my route was sort of through engineering, financial services, very much sort of banking, and then into the investment world, where I was able to sort of rekindle that love of sustainable and renewable investments. And I think for me, going back to sort of the CFA point and what that sort of gives, I think in my line of work, understanding how businesses really work and having a really good foundation on the accounting side, as well as some maths ability, that's very important. And I think that's probably what the CFA gave me. So if you have a master's in finance already, or you already know that stuff through a different route, then yes, it's never going to be a prerequisite, but it is incredibly useful for really understanding how businesses work, how you value businesses. You need to get the basics right before you can move on to the other stuff. There are also some free options like Open Yale, so their open free courses are very good. And I would also say in the industry, focusing on an industry is quite a good route. So whether you focus on solar or wind, that could also give you an edge against other people. And then once you have that sort of deep understanding, you can broaden that out to different industries. Also, I would say it's a growing industry. It's important across many different sectors. So you see, sustainability coming into law, into business development, into infrastructure and listed equities. It's broadening all the time, and it's going to affect every company. I mean, including big companies like Google and Facebook. Them trying to become more sustainable in terms of powering their servers, etc. So yeah, many different routes, but good foundations are key. So going on to another question. So Max, I think this is one for you. What is the most valuable type of experience you can have as an applicant when applying for green investment?
Sure. Thanks, Josh. What I thought when I saw this one is that there isn't really a specific list. You could say that, so of the subset of funds that I've worked for and with, you have some that are more, if you think of it as impact investment or green investment, some of them are more impact or green focused, and some of them are more kind of, they're all investment focused, but you kind of know what I mean if I say some are more impact focused, some are more investment focused. If you're applying for example, a very kind of impact driven fund where, for example, they expect a lower return on investment, for example, lower than market return on investment, then maybe, some volunteering might play really well in your applications there, because that's kind of more what they're looking for. Obviously, if you're looking for a more kind of corporate institution, then the kind of classic financial, legal, accounting, etc. will be perhaps more heavily weighted, and volunteering might be overlooked. So there's not really a kind of one size fits all thing. All I would say is that if you're at university and you're applying to particularly, I think, a small investment fund, that, you know, kind of quote unquote leadership experience is really great to get at an early age. So whether that's, you know, whether that's sort of running a society or even like starting a small business, as a lot of people have done during lockdown, something where you really are taking responsibility for a project overall, even at a reasonably early age, I think that's really attractive. But I think it has to be quite general, the advice, because there are so many different types of green institutions that fall under the green investment kind of name or sector, that there's not really one thing that everyone can do. Otherwise, everyone would do it. So.
Very good. So, Catherine, I think this one might be good for you. Do you think with a greater drive towards private investment into climate change action will result in action targets being met?
That's quite a tricky question, isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean, I think I think that, I guess we'd all hope that the answer to that is yes, but I think we've got quite a long way to go to see how significant like the private investment is, whether that continues to increase, and hopefully it will, with increased, I guess, government legislation, and which will encourage that.
Are you seeing an increased number of companies coming to your firm this year? Sort of,
yeah, well, I would say that we did have an increase in sustainability teams, say, in the last couple of cohorts, for sure. Actually, like, I guess a slight diversion from green investment, but sustainability and health have been quite kind of growing sectors, I would say, that we've seen.
Great. I think Max, you might have something to add to this as well. Am I right in thinking?
This was the question about whether a drive towards private investment into climate change. Yeah. So yes, it will move towards that, but no, it will not solve the problem, because climate change is a global issue, and one of the core issues, ethical issues, that really underpins this is that, and people have different terminology that they use to categorize countries, but if you talk about developed and developing countries, developed countries reached their status of development in really carbon inefficient ways, taking huge amounts of oil out of the ground to burn for their own pleasure, and causing a lot of the problems that we see today. Developing countries look to that as the model for growth, and there's a big question mark over whether it's ethical for developed countries to turn around to developing countries and say, oh yeah, we did this, but we now know it's bad, so you can't do it. That's not a problem that the private sector can solve. That is an international government negotiation problem. So yeah, while private investment being directed towards environmentally sustainable companies and projects and initiatives is going to make a difference, for sure, and there will be knock-on effects too, the broader question of combating climate change is much bigger, I think.
I would just add to that, the way I sort of see this question is, you basically have different time horizons. So with sort of capital going in with sort of capital I deal with, it has a very medium-term horizon. People think in sort of terms of 5 years. These are multi-decade problems that really, as Max said, governments are the ones with longer-term views through regulations. They sort of need to start or incentivize certain industries that may not be financially viable for a private company to come in with investments. A good example is sort of the offshore wind market in the UK. You also had like early solar in Germany, where they managed to get the technology going, but then later down the line, it was sort of taken, and the Chinese developed it further. There was, I think there's sort of an analogy by a writer called William Janeway, where it was like you have this three-legged stool. One leg of the stool is government, two is corporate investment or corporate development, and then three is speculation for venture capitalist type investment into the space. And really, you need all three for green investments. It's kind of critical. That's what I'd add to that. So I think a question for Philip. I think this might be a quick one for you, Philip, but does your business provide studentship opportunities, support for continuing education such as masters, etc.? How do you see these sort of opportunities within your business and for sort of studentship and type things?
Yeah, look, so I think maybe I can answer the question more generally. That might be more helpful. My impression of the market, having been a job hunter myself multiple times over the last decade or more, is that for impact-driven organizations, be it green, be it development, be it gender, social, whatever it might be, are generally small, right? And as such, they do not have capacity to train. So, it's not like PwC or HSBC or, big companies like this that can take on graduates as part of their recruitment strategy and train them up and get some value out of them in the meantime, right? For the impact space is coming more mainstream, but I think by and large, the employers are still relatively small. So the opportunities for graduates are few and far between. That's not to say that we haven't taken the odd graduate, but they tend to be in, I'd say, sort of more sort of operations and support functions. If you're looking to get into more front office line of work, my recommendation would be to develop a core skill as a banker, as an accountant, as a lawyer, as an environmental and social expert. Do that through, get a good solid training, and then take that into an impact-driven organization, and you'll skip a few rungs in the ladder, I'd say, and you probably benefit. You'll be a much more valuable member of the team coming in that way. We're looking to try and increase especially in these times with the number of graduates looking for jobs. We're looking to actually start a graduate program, but we've only just got above 50 employees, and I think it's the first time we've really thought that this could be an option. But just related to that, just one final point is because I've seen a lot of questions around, what sort of finance skill set or whatever do you need to get into green investing? And I think back to my experience at the Green Investment Bank, right, where we had 120 odd of us. And yes, okay, there was about half of us were bankers by training, but there were, groups of lawyers, groups of accountants, groups of environmental specialists. There were engineers who were specialists in solar engineers, wind engineers, waste plant engineers. So I guess, if you do have a background in a profession that isn't directly related to green, it doesn't mean it's not going to be relevant for an organization that is doing green investing. Right?
I think that's great. Yeah, I think don't be put off by not having, if you have an interest and a passion for sustainability, but you are, have a law degree, that shouldn't stop you achieving where you want to get to. I think that's great. I'm just looking at a couple of the live questions. One was just very relevant to me, which was, yes, I did. The question is basically, did I go traveling after a couple of years of work? And if you did you find it difficult getting into work after going traveling? I would say I was traveling, but I was also working pretty much, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, as a consultant remote basis. So still working for funds. Obviously, pre-COVID, that was not the done thing in asset management, but it was. I never really had like a break, but I did try and combine travel with still sustainability and investments. So I think that answers that. Maybe one for Catherine. What evaluation tools do you use to compare sustainability, impact, ESG investments, if you use that in your line of work?
So I guess ours is slightly different in terms of, I guess maybe I'll start in terms of maybe from the perspective of how we select our teams and therefore I guess our investments, and that's down to an application and a kind of assessment process through interviews. So we use our portfolio companies who have experience in kind of different impact areas to then assess the teams that we take on, and kind of whether that is whether it's a team who's applying has kind of the impact and business that we want to see. In terms of, I guess, then how we continue to assess the impact that those teams are having, we do quarterly reporting with our teams, and they submit kind of different criteria around like how many beneficiaries there are for their products, how many users there are in their impact areas, and then we do our own analysis on kind of what that looks like, and do compare it to, I guess, other venture firms and how that compares, and that culminates in an impact report. So I guess we, to some extent, assess our own impact and compare that to other businesses and report it in impact report. So we don't necessarily use tools kind of at our level, but it would be good to hear kind of if you guys have different approaches.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know, Max, if you want to jump on with what sort of evaluation tools to compare sustainability. I think it's quite an interesting question, probably that all of us have a different view on the tools that we use.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think I'll start by saying that the tools that I've observed are quite similar in that we will, of the companies that we've invested in, we will ask them to fill out, to respond to questions that we have relating to all kinds of issues. So, for example, if you're trying to measure if you are focused on energy and like electrifying an area, you talk about try and measure the increase year on year by asking these questions every year about how many people you're reaching and how many kind of kilowatts on average they're consuming, how big the products are while they're working and stuff like that. The problem really arises so that's how you'd measure energy. And then, if you're trying to measure a completely different kind of impact outcome, someone asked a question about standardizing impact metrics, and I think that's a real challenge for this industry as a whole, because what data you choose to collect is going to define how your story is told. And other people have also mentioned greenwashing in the pre-submitted questions, and this is something that can happen there too. You choose data to collect to tell a story that you want to tell. It's not that people do it, but it's a risk that you run. So I think that really needs to improve overall, and I hope that in the medium term for this industry, we end up with a kind of robust, kind of centralized body or set of statistics to gather that will enable us to measure, for example, not just the impact of individual companies against each other or individual industries against each other, but also individual funds against each other, which is very difficult to do at the moment.
And Philip, I don't know if you want to add to that, because I know you've done a few different projects of accommodation to roads, big infrastructure projects. How do you sort of compare the sustainability and impact of these projects and sort of the ESG aspect of it?
Yeah, so Max kind of covered it really. The big problem is that you're trying to make the subjective objective, right? And that measuring impact, it's not tangible. It's not like the bottom line on your P&L. It's much more wishy-washy, right? And there is a huge industry out there trying to drive standardization with various industry groups, both in DFI space and in the private sector, that are trying to bring standardization. And I think we are heading in the right direction. But I think it is always going to remain slightly challenging. But look, I mean, I think that the green is simpler for some sectors. So you have organizations like the Green Bond Principles or the Climate Bonds Initiative, who have set standards which you have to abide by if you want to recognize your bond as green. 5-10 years ago, people were calling anything green. Nowadays, most investors are wise to the fact that you want to recognize certification entity to get behind your green label. So things are improving, but yeah, it's very difficult. You can measure how many kilowatt hours come out of a power plant, but how many hours of homework for children in low-income houses that supports studying in the evening is very difficult. So that's the challenge that we're all trying to find, is how to actually, what is the underlying impact on the people and the planet? That's very, very difficult to capture actually. Yeah,
very good. So I think what I would add just on the sort of consistency in the metrics and how I measure sustainability, also how it's evolving, was a question in the pre-submitted questions. First I'd say, we're quite strict on how we, categorize industries, and that's just how we do it. But there are some industries which are more unsustainable than others, and then if you're still trying to change them industries, you might have to look at more of a relative view versus peers, and also are there companies within a certain sector who are improving over time, and also looking at other factors like health and safety, social factors, good governance. Our sort of view from Green Investment Partners is that previously the market put a price on nature that was basically free, and now that we obviously realise nature is not free and there are implications for our actions and that the system needs to change. One basic thing that we do, but we're quite strict about, is the revenues of our companies have to have a majority coming from green sectors. So over 50% coming from solar, coming from wind, the sectors that we've chosen. But we also look obviously at the equivalent CO2 per million revenues. There is often a lack of disclosure, so especially in some of the smaller companies, medium cap companies. So obviously that's not an easy task, and you can use third parties to try and questionnaire the company or try and find some other way to measure it. And then another thing I would just note is, there's even debates on industries like batteries. Are batteries green? You need to be very careful if they're using unethical mining practices. But they are helping shift the world to a renewable future. So a lot of that is, how do you evaluate that? And sort of, it's quite hard to do in a quantitative measure. So a lot of it is looking in the nuts and bolts of the company and making a view on that. And then there's other companies like, the WWF, they try to do impact investing through basically getting a board seat and on certain companies, and influence polluting companies from the inside, which was more of like an activist approach. And you can always go short in bad companies if we bring it back to the finance world. But Yeah, okay, on to, I think, some more of the live questions. So let me just have a look here for a second. Again, there's quite a lot of questions around sort of graduate master's programs. So this one might be for you, Max, but would pursuing a master's in energy economics or a related field aid in securing investment finance roles pertaining to renewable energy for those of us coming from economics background? I believe you came from an economics background, is that right, Max?
I did, and I think the answer is clearly yes. I think that you want to, with a master's degree or similar, you want to fill a gap. And the key ingredients to your question, I think this is James Keen's question. The key ingredient is that you're going to be trying to go into an investment or finance role relating to renewable energy. So understanding the finance and or economics behind energy is going to be extremely useful for that. Yeah.
Great. And then a question we can probably all answer. So I'll probably start with Catherine. What have you done in your career that you are most proud of from a green environmental standpoint? What would you like to achieve in your career from a green environmental perspective? And I would just say, we've only got a few minutes left, so this is probably going to be the final question, and we can all sort of end it answering this question. Over to you, Catherine.
I guess probably repeating myself a bit, but I definitely think so I've been at Bethnal Green Ventures for a couple of years now, and so the kind of teams that I've seen go through the programme are still kind of quite young, so but have made significant progress through that period. So it's just seeing kind of the continued positive impact that they're going to have on the world, and in terms of also going forward, I guess as kind of a lot of fund managers is continuing to kind of grow the funds that we have so that we can continue to invest more significant amounts in our team as we move forward, is what I hope to achieve in the future.
Great. Max, do you want to be next? Answer that question.
Sure, very briefly. I've had the shortest career to date, I think, of any of the panelists. So there, I'm not going to wax on about something I'm massively proud of. I think that the biggest achievements that I have in this space are going to be in front of me, and I'm continuing to build and looking forward to coming back in 5 or 10 years' time and telling you guys all a great story about the past.
Brilliant. Philip.
Thanks, Josh. So the achievement for me, which I'm very proud of, actually last week I think it was last week when Boris Johnson stood up and said that he wanted the UK to become the Saudi Arabia of wind, right? And and he made the bold statement that every household in the UK could be powered by offshore wind. And when I was first started investing in offshore wind in 2012, the sector no one was willing to invest in it, and it was going nowhere. And I'm incredibly proud of what we did at the Green Investment Bank to get that market moving again. And we basically did ourselves out of a job, which is why the company was sold to Macquarie, so it could start doing stuff outside of the UK market, because the private sector picked up and just and took over. And that's why we're in the position today that this is one of the most promising industries that the UK has to be proud of. And just being a very, very small part of that as an analyst, junior analyst back in the day was I'm incredibly proud of. So looking forward, I want to be part of the story for similar successes, right? So I was lucky to work on the first green bond in East Africa last year, which was for a student accommodation provider called Acorn in Kenya. That was the first green bond in the whole of East Africa. But if that's the only green bond in East Africa, then so what, right? So I want to be part of a story which sees green financial instruments just become mainstream. And if that Acorn bond was the first step in that, and the next 5 years of my work can help to see lots of repeat issuances, then that's the kind of thing that I want to do.
Brilliant. And then I'll just end it, and it's kind of a similar thing, but obviously I've started this business in the last year, and I think my main, I hope this becomes my biggest achievement, and my main aim at the moment is that hopefully some of the capital that we can put to work can go to some of the green companies who are truly green in the space, and that also, as more capital flows into the space, we can help, put that to work, and other companies will see that this is basically the way that things need to go. So yeah, I suppose watch this space. And I realized there's been a lot of questions that I haven't got round to answering. So, please, ping a message to the alumni dash events, or hit us all up on LinkedIn if people are happy with that. And I'm sure people will be willing to answer any further questions there. Just as a closing remark, this is a reminder that the recording will be circulated afterwards, and yes, please email us and we'll try and answer any remaining questions that you might have. And remember that the Careers Service can support you for up to 3 years after graduation. So you can look at their website for more information, or get in touch at the same email address, alumni-events@bristol.ac.uk, for more information. And lastly, just thank you from all of us for attending. It's great to see so much enthusiasm and desire to learn a little bit more about green investments, and hopefully this will continue for many more decades, and hope to see some of you guys in the space in the future. So thanks ever so much.
Thanks, Josh. Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, Josh.